Welcome to the Personal Development Mastery Podcast. I'm Agi Keramidas and my mission is to inspire you to rise up, grow, stand out and take action towards the next level of your life. I interview leaders, influencers, entrepreneurs, authors, exceptional people who can and will inspire you to improve your life. Tune in for 2 episodes each week and make sure you subscribe to the podcast to get the episodes as soon as they are released. In today's show, I am delighted to speak with Chess Edwards. Chess, you are a meditation teacher and a spiritual guide. Your entire career has been spent guiding people beyond their current limits and perceptions and into a greater and deeper engagement with the world. After a lifetime of dedicated personal development, you devoted the past decade to your spiritual development and awakening, and this has led you to, as you say, a rapid collapse of the restrictive personal identification. You are dedicated to helping others reveal, awaken, and empower their highest truth, potential, and brilliance. Chess, it's my absolute joy to speak with you today. I'm delighted to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Agi. I'm really glad to be here, and thank you for doing everything you do to make these opportunities possible.
Thank you. Chess, it's in conversations like this, I always want to start with a little bit of background because, I gave you the introduction and as we were saying earlier, some people might think that this is what you have always been. So they would listen to someone, in your case, a spiritual guide, and they might think that you were born in a monastery or something. But you have, from what I know with your background, you have spent a great deal of your life as an adventure travel guide. So do you want to share with us some elements of your story so we can get a better understanding?
Yeah, thank you, Agi. That is, I find a really valuable place to start is understanding how anybody arrives in a place that they are. I spent about 20 plus years guiding adventure travel trips around the world. And it seemed like a really glamorous lifestyle. And whenever I'd be with my friends, when I'd be back home in the States and I'd go to a gathering of friends, I always got the same thing. People are like, "Oh, you've got it made. You've made the right decision. Like you've figured it all out." And they had no idea the emotional turmoil that was going on within me. There's a great saying that says we do ourselves a great disservice when we compare our insides to other people's outsides.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they're seeing me, on the adventure travel guide, and I've got it all together. And the reason that I was doing so much of that work, Agi, was because I had enough trauma and betrayal and abandonment and hurt in my young life that I didn't know how to be around people. I didn't feel safe around people. I didn't feel safe in human relationships. I didn't feel safe in relationship to myself. So it was actually less threatening to go spend months wandering through the Himalayas and snowstorms and, getting lost up in the Himalayas than it was to actually be engaged in real human, deep, intimate, vulnerable relationships. And the trips were 2 to 3 weeks long typically, and how convenient that I could be the guide and I could maintain that posture. And this right about the time when it started to get a lot more intimate and close, I could say, "Hey, look at that, time's up, trip's over, you got to go home now." So that was significant in my, and I didn't know it. I didn't know that was what was happening. I didn't know that I was that afraid. I didn't know that I was that incapable until I stopped doing the adventure travel because I wanted to have a more stable life. So I came home to community and I found I was quite bad at it. I lived with such a state of anxiety. I was constantly questioning if I had done anything or said anything or acted in a way that might perhaps cause anybody to once again abandon me or betray me or hurt me. So I was so scared of ever feeling that level of pain again that I was always on edge and careful and defended about how I was appearing in the world. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think many people can relate to that, to the appearance or what other people perceive us, or what we think they perceive us for, because we don't really know. So I understand. Yes. So
No,
what happened afterwards?
so I started to recognize the difficulty and the challenges of the life I was leading, and how I didn't want a sense of tension, inner tension and anxiety anymore. So I started doing a fair amount of personal development work. I pursued retreats, intimate small group gatherings of looking at my childhood wounding and what was my story, what were my beliefs about myself, and to start to see them for how untrue they were, my sense of unlovability or unworthiness, to start to recognize where those came from, the fallacy of those beliefs.
Yeah.
So I started to do that work, and it was valuable, and I still do that work. I think it's absolutely necessary for anybody who truly wants to evolve and mature. But I was finding that it was only getting me so far. And I did have a meditation practice as well early in my life. We can talk about that in a bit. But it wasn't really a meditation to look at the true nature of being. It was just a transcendental meditation practice to try to be more calm. So that could only get me so far as well. And I was working with this one group of people. There were about a dozen of us, and we'd meet 4 times a year, every 3 months, and we would do a deep dive emotional journey of personal development. We'd stay up all night Friday night and into Saturday, and a lot of wailing and crying, and releasing. So the good work. But I was working with this group for like 3 years, and I was going back to do another weekend, and I was feeling a little bit guilty. I was feeling like, God, I'm going back again with some of the same questions about who am I? Why don't I feel okay in the world? And how do I release that? And it felt, Augie, like I was going back and almost tugging on the sleeve of God and saying, hi, me again. I know we've been over this. Can we go over it again? And maybe it'll sink in deeper this time and actually take root. And then I realized, because I was starting to also find teachers who were teaching about the true nature of being, the true self. So I realized, wait a minute, I'm not going back and tugging on the sleeve of God. I've never been to God, which is to say, I've never been to my true self. I've never been to that God consciousness, that purity of consciousness. Oh, that's why this isn't sticking. Because I'm working with a construct of my mind, my self-image, with my mind, and I'm trying to get my mind to stabilize, my mind-generated sense of self to stabilize. And I started to realize that'll never happen. That'll never happen. The mind is not meant to be a stable place. It's meant to make stuff up. That's what it does. It's how we have computers and microphones and Zoom and internet and song and dance and recipes for food and all. It's how we create everything. We're making stuff up and playing with it. And then we make something up and we go, well, what if I take that apart again and add something else?
Yeah.
And I realized I was giving that same unstable mind the job of creating a self. And that's when it all changed, Augie. I started to realize, oh, what do I really want? I want to know me. I want to know me prior to conditioning, prior to programming, prior to story. beyond story. I want to know the eternal, stable essence of my true spiritual nature. So that's kind of how the trajectory went.
Tell me, before you reached that point that you understood what you just told me, what were your, let's say, spiritual beliefs? Were you a spiritual person before, or did something happen and you understood more about it and started cultivating it?
That's a great question. Yes, I would have absolutely said I was a spiritual person.
Okay.
You know, if I was on a dating app and they said, you know, tell us about your spirituality, I would have ticked the box that said spiritual, but not religious.
Yes. Okay.
And certainly, I mean, I had led treks in the Himalayas for, 15, 20 years and spent a lot of time in the monasteries. Augie, I had no idea what spirituality really was. I really didn't. I was lumping the spirituality in with the egoic self. I was just trying to be a more spiritual ego. And so what changed was when I found teachers, when I started to hear these types of conversations that you and I are having, and teachers are starting to say, you know, there's a you that exists beyond this mind-body experience you're currently having. And that you is actually larger, more vast than you will ever know. That's when I started to get a sense of what our spiritual nature is. Mm-hmm. I think I felt that my spiritual nature was still a separate thing. It was still a separate part of chess, instead of recognizing that chess is just a modulation of divine spirit. That spirit is larger than, I want to say larger than me, but what I mean by that is larger than the mind-body experience. I can't say it's really larger than me because it is me.
These are the limitations that the words that we use have. I mean, they can only signpost something. They can't really describe it. No. Can you take us then? I want you to continue the story. From that period of realization, then you embarked on a deep spiritual journey, the last decade, you said. Yeah. So can you share that part of the journey with us as well, that brings you to today? And then we'll go into some specifics.
Okay. So I can tell you that it's been a journey of patience and faith and devotion. I had a teacher who I've never met. It was just a teacher. His name is Ajya Shanti. He's very well known, many books and a lot of videos online. And I've listened and studied with his teachings for a while, and he's one of my teachers. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he speaks to is that to really awaken into our pure essence of being, he says, you could figure probably about 10 years. And he said, and he comes from a Zen background. And he said, and that's living in a Zen community doing this 24/7. I have found that it with devotion, it doesn't necessarily have to take that long. It takes as long as it takes for any individual. But it has been a journey of absolute patience. Mm-hmm. And the reason I brought him up was because he asked one of probably the most valuable questions for me. And that was, what do you want? Mm-hmm. And when I really landed on what I want is the true, essential, authentic nature of me, to be present, to be available, to live this life rather than living through my egoic construct, and rather than taking the world in through my eyes and giving it directly to my idea of self and all of its fears and uncertainties and disempowering self-beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
I want to have the true essence of me awakened and present. That's when everything really shifted. And so that journey, you're asked about how it's been, that was probably about 7-8 years ago. And there is now a pretty fully awakened essence of being that is absolutely at peace and in a state of allowing. And it keeps deepening, Augie. Like almost every day, there's a new sense of, oh, the peace actually, it stabilizes even more, or is more predominant. For me and for most, it was there are moments of incremental shifts, like you hit a new plateau, but it's a plateau that stabilizes for a while. And then maybe through a particular meditation or moment or a week of time, that seems to open up even more or stabilize or become even softer. And that's what it's been for me. It's just these beautiful plateaus that just keep incrementally opening up. And it does point to one other part of this journey is that I've worked with a lot of people who have had a quote awakening.
Yes.
And it's interesting when people say, oh, when I had my awakening 5 years ago, and I'm thinking, oh, wow, like you totally awakened 5 years ago and it's stabilized, and you realize, no, that didn't happen. Because that's very, very, very rare.
Somehow I can't think that it is a moment and one moment you're not and the next moment you are and it's permanent. Somehow it doesn't sound...
No.
Yes.
Exactly. So, but what happens is in those moments, one might have a fairly complete awakening. It can happen through, working with substance or ayahuasca or different, mind-altering substances. Yes. It can happen in deep meditations, in a 10-day Vipassana retreat, silent meditation. So yes, that can happen. But what often happens is one feels an exhilaration and a bliss and like an exhilaration that they go, oh my God, it's the oh my God moment.
Okay.
And then what they do is they try to maintain that or look for it again and again and again. And if it doesn't keep showing up in that same level of ecstasy, the feeling is, oh, I've lost it. And it's important to remember that moment of pure freedom, of going, oh, that's what I am. I am the pure I am consciousness. I'm already free. Oh, there's that. That moment of bliss is the human experience of the truth. But once the truth is realized and embodied, you don't walk around in a state of constant bliss. The beautiful things of Rupert Spira and Mooji, they say the same thing. They're like, look, awakening is not an extraordinary thing. It's just you being you. So we end up just living then in this state of more normalized peace and presence. But I think a lot of people, they have an experience and then they look for that again and again and again and try to recreate it. And they feel like, oh, I've lost it. And indeed, kind of they have, because they're looking for the human experience of awakening rather than just letting the purity of consciousness be. I know that could be a little unwieldy, but that's part of how I've experienced.
No, it makes complete sense to me. I love the way you explained it. I want to go back a little bit now and discuss because you said the dedicated lifelong journey in personal development, and you said that it was great, but it led you up to a point and it couldn't really allow you to progress much further. And then spiritual development, if I understand it correctly, complemented that, or intersected, if you want. And then you went into a different direction. So can we talk about those two, personal development, spiritual development, maybe the common elements they have, because they share commonalities, and where they move in different directions? And let's start with this.
Yeah, beautiful. So, the personal development is working with the temporary person. We can look at the person as a egoic self, and the egoic self is simply the self that we have made up. It's a construct that we've created in our own minds. When we were toddlers, we didn't know our pure essence. And yet the ego starts to develop. And you'll see toddlers looking at their hands, going, whoa. Then it's almost like, they're going, wow, this is it. Whoa, this wasn't here yesterday. There's a me. Suddenly there's a me. And then there's a separate mom and a separate dad and a separate me. And what's happening in the mind is saying, who am I? It needs an identity. There's a recognition that it's impossible to go through this life without a sense of self. And the baby, the toddler, is trying to answer that question. Who am I? And the answer isn't there. The truth of, you're an individuated expression of the one divine consciousness. You are absolute love. You always been love. That's not there. So the mind has no choice but to make up a self, a construct. It constructs a self based on, what does mom say? What does dad say? Maybe mom's at work all day and she's never there. And so the young construct self starts to develop, say, maybe I'm not worthy of being loved. So we create a self. Okay. So the personal development is working on that person, that self. You can think of the person as being a vehicle for the expression of the divine one consciousness that is knowing itself through the individuated soul. So every soul is different. Your soul is different than my soul. Your soul says, I want to move toward that. That feels good. My soul goes, interesting. I'm not so drawn to that, but wow, this thing, right? So the one consciousness gets to know itself in its infinite potentiality, through every individuated soul that is simply being housed, being expressed through a temporary mind-body person experience. So we do the personal development, absolutely, because it's valuable to work on our traumas and our wounding and our stories and the self we've constructed. But that's not the entirety of us. For me, the intersection has been when I recognize that in order to really be with let's say the childhood wounding of self, I need to meet that childhood wounding with love. So we talk about self-love a lot in this work. But usually we're self-love, the love that we're trying to meet our shadows with and our wounding with, it's just a loving idea. The spiritual development actually opens us to the embodiment of pure love that isn't a thought. It's not an idea. It's just the love, the loving consciousness, the pure awareness. Ram Dass called it the unconditional loving awareness. I am unconditional loving awareness. When that pure loving awareness is awakened and present, it is like a loving parent that just is always there, always there, always there with their arms open. And whatever wounding the child comes with, what does that child want? They don't want to be fixed. They don't want logic. They want to be held in love. So for me, that's the intersection. It's resting in and taking the years to allow a purity of absolute love that isn't a thought, isn't an idea, it's just an absolute beingness to become so prevalent that no matter what comes up in my psyche and no matter what wounding arises or trigger arises, I can rest in love and meet that part of me and just love it. Just hold space and go, you're okay. You're okay. And then my child self gets healed with love again and again and again. So that's the intersection for me. That's the meeting. Because without the spiritual awakening of pure love, it's just my mind trying to have better thoughts and to work with the mind self.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that this is what's missing from, that the image of the people that we call them sometimes quote unquote self-help junkies, people that go in from each seminar to the other and they feel good for a period of time, but there's always something missing. So when do you think it's the right time for someone to realize, or is it a matter of something coming to them when they're ready to make that beginning of the journey towards spiritual development?
Yeah. This is why I love what you do, Augie. I love the fact that there's this podcast, because what you're offering is you're offering the opportunity for somebody to have even exposure mm-hmm. to another perspective.
Yeah.
Some hear it and go, interesting. Don't really know what they're talking about. Another person hears it and goes, oh, wait, whoa, hold on. That made sense. That just kind of landed. Mm-hmm. So when it's the right time, yeah, you already know the answer to that question, of course, right? It's when it is. And so the best we can do is keep offering truth or possibility and keep speaking to it as lovingly and often as possible. And those that it feels right to at the right time mm-hmm. will say, oh yeah, I want to know more about that. And they'll start to bring themselves mm-hmm. to that experience. But boy, the devotion is so necessary, and the discipline is necessary. I work a lot with people, and I do, here in my home, people come and they'll book a couple hours with me, and they'll walk out the door going, that changes everything. Like my whole world just shifted. Wow, this is amazing. Mm-hmm. And I let them know. I say, okay, great, walk out that door. But I can tell you for certain that unless you pursue a path of study and devotion and discipline, it will not last. Because it's like coming out of a deep, 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 deep sleep. If literally you've been laying in bed sleeping and somebody comes up and kind of wakes you up for a second, mm-hmm. Smacks you upside the head and wakes you up, you may awaken for that moment and go, oh my God, wow, I had no idea that this world existed, this awake world. I was always in the dream. Mm-hmm. But you're groggy. You're not going to stay awake. So every meditation is an interruption of the habits of the mind. Every meditation is a new moment of being a little bit more awake. Mm-hmm. Then we fall asleep. We meditate again and we wake up again, and then we fall asleep, and then we meditate again and we wake up again. And if one is doing a meditation that is geared toward actual self-realization, inquiry, who am I really? How do I come into the knowing of that? If that's what one's meditation is aligned with, then with repetition, discipline, devotion, that self will awaken. And then after a while, it'll stay awake. Just the same as if I kept patting you on the cheek while you were asleep. After a while, you'd go, all right, fine, I'm awake, I'm awake.
Jess, I would like to talk since you started. I would like to talk about meditation because you are a meditation teacher, and I suppose that you would say that it's one of the tools, if you want, and I'm using a personal development term now to describe it, to facilitate the journey. I want for very briefly, do you mind? Let's assume that someone who is listening to us here is not very much familiar with meditation, or maybe they know a couple of things. So in a nutshell, what would you say that meditation is, like a definition if you want, and what benefits should one expect? Why would someone take the time or bother? What's in it about it?
Beautiful. So in a nutshell, there's various types and purposes of meditation. The meditation that I teach and that I offer is a meditation of self-inquiry. So it's a meditation that is designed to help one come into the knowing of their truth, of their eternal nature. And so meditation really is a moment to stop and feel into what is the self beyond the mind. Prior to mind, beyond the mind, what is the self that isn't being thought? What is the self that just is and is always present? So meditation is the opportunity to stop and intentionally point one's awareness beyond the mind with the inquiry of what's there? Who am I when I'm not thinking myself into being with all my thoughts of worthiness and unworthiness and lovability and not lovability? If all that were to stop, even for 5 seconds, would I disappear? Or might there be something there that is called me? So meditation is an opportunity to interrupt the story of self and discover the self that doesn't need a story, that just already is.
You said about moments, you used the word moments. Can you expand of this? Because for me, and I suppose with others, meditation more brings to mind a practice, a lengthy practice, rather than a moment, as you say. So can you expand on this?
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. So take a moment, if anyone listening, and bring your awareness to the presence of your left foot. Okay, got it?
Yeah.
You didn't even have to look. You just intentionally stopped and said, I want to be aware of my left foot. And there it was. You didn't just grow a left foot.
Yeah.
So it was a moment. That was a meditation to intentionally point one's awareness to something that is present, but simply typically not looked at, not felt into. So one of the meditation practices that I love, and in the gift that I've got for people, here is some of the guided meditations. One of them is a meditation about feeling into a self that feels good, a self that feels stable, a self that feels like it's not burdened by the ideas of self. And to give that a metaphor. So for me, when I first started this work, I felt into a redwood tree. We have these beautiful trees in California here in the United States that are called redwoods. They're just beautiful, giant, stable, majestic beings. And I would feel into that stability and that grace. And I'd feel into the feeling of, what if I was a redwood? What would that feel like? Oh, it'd feel like, hey, like a storm could come. And the redwood goes, okay, bring it on. I'm good. I'm fine. So I would feel into that. So how this relates to moments is I would, throughout my day, and this is a practice that I invite, find a metaphor. I am an open meadow. I am a deep ocean. I am the clear sky. I'm a giant, I'm a stable redwood. Feel into something. Know what it feels like. And then throughout the day, what if you took 10 seconds at a time just to stop and take a breath? And just like we pointed the attention to the left foot, take a breath and point one's attention to the feeling of grace. Mm-hmm. 10 seconds. That's it. Great. There I am. Beautiful. And then go about your day. If one did that 20 times a day, that's 200 seconds. That's just over 3 minutes. And not only does it, again, awaken the truth of self again and again and again and again, it rewires the brain. It rewires our sense of self. We interrupt the habit, the pattern of identifying with our construct of self, and allows us to feel into something that already feels whole and alive and strong and peaceful and loving. Do that 20 times a day. So a meditation can be a moment, it can be a breath, or it can be sitting for an hour, be sitting for 2 hours, or anything in between. Mm-hmm.
You said, and I loved very much the way you described it, that about interrupting that moment, interrupting the habitual mind, what's going on, and you said awakening the truth and rewiring also the brain. Is this cumulative? So is it? Does it stack up the more we do it? Is there some or it just comes and goes in waves rather than being built up?
So, no, it stacks up.
It stacks up. Okay.
It's cumulative. It's the awakening that happens within a moment or within a meditation of going, oh, there I am. Oh, and it's a feeling. It's always a feeling. It's not. It may start as a concept, and that's how this work works. But through the meditation, it drops into a feeling of grace, of peace. And we go, oh, there I am. And it lasts longer. It's like then you come out of the meditation and it's awake now. It's more awake. Mm-hmm. So it's more present. And then I can go about into the world and my ego self is still present going, ooh, I'm triggered by that. Oh, I don't feel good about that. And simultaneously, this is kind of where it leads to. My own triggers, my own confusions, doubts, fears, uncertainties, wanting to blame somebody for something, that happens within an unwavering peace. Like my humanity, my person still has reactions, but instead of being completely collapsed into that, the cumulative awakening of pure peace is so prevalent that I feel my stuff come up. And again, like that loving parent, I just hold space for it. I go, oh yeah, there's my stuff. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. Oh, I'm feeling uneasy about something. And instead of collapsing down that rabbit hole of anxiety, mm-hmm. I feel it and I don't budge from the loving embrace of pure awareness, the witness that is watching the anxiety and not believing it so much. Does that answer that question about?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And I would expect that these, if you want to call them skills, they are, apart from yourself, they also influence your behavior and what's going on with your life apart from any meditation, the person that you are.
Absolutely. I couldn't do this work because this work puts me in the position constantly of people judging me. and saying, what the hell are you talking about? If I'm still identified with the egoic person who's concerned with that, then I will back off the work and I will try to modify and I will try to placate in order to fit, in order to belong, in order to not be abandoned, in order, all the things that my egoic self was so afraid of. So it affects everything. You start to learn that you can have conversations with people. You can lean into a conversation with somebody that you would have abandoned, that you would have run away or defended or made them wrong, or, you would have done all these things to alleviate your fear of being seen, of being, especially us men. Man, we do not like to be inadequate at anything. We really don't. It's kind of built into our DNA, because if we were out hunting saber-toothed tigers, the one guy who was the most inadequate was the guy who died, So we don't like to be inadequate at anything, and that includes in our conversation. Which is why that you did mention earlier, the emotional vocabulary builder that we can get to at some point, but learning how to express ourselves, how to know ourselves and feel deeply into ourselves, and then how to express that. Most people aren't good at that. Most men really aren't good at that. And so when they're in a relationship and their partner is saying, come on, tell me more about you, there's an inner panic that goes on and goes, I don't know how to do that. And I don't want to be inadequate. So I'm going to posture and show you all the good stuff. I'm not going to be vulnerable and show you my inadequacies. And the partner is saying, but that's what I want to see. Because that's trust. That brings trust and intimacy. So yeah, it changes pretty much everything. We can be present in life and not budge. We can just be lovingly present no matter what shows up, in a state of allowing and compassion and awareness. And it doesn't mean that we don't set boundaries and say no to this and yes to that, but we just do it without the angst or the anger or the sense of separation.
Thank you for listening to this first half of the conversation with Chess Edwards. Listen to the next episode, number 82, for the second part, where Chess discusses the story of the self we've constructed, self-doubt, and the amazing topic of emotional awareness and emotional vocabulary. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and rate Personal Development Mastery on Apple Podcasts, and also share this episode with someone who you think will benefit from it. If you want to become part of an exclusive community, gain access to unique content, and at the same time support this podcast, then become my patron. The link is in the show notes, or you can type bit.ly/pdmpat. If you want to know more about what I do and how I can help you, join my Facebook group Personal Development Mastery. Again, the link is in the show notes, or you can simply type bit.ly/pdmgroup. And until next time, stand out, don't fit in,